imagine for a second, right, that you are just a regular college student.
Okay, yeah, I'm picturing it, just a normal student.
Yeah, normal student. And you go down the street to the local diner,
Right.
and the owner there says, hey, we're actually really short-staffed this summer. I will pay you like $500 a week to just flip burgers.
Sounds like a great deal for a college kid.
Exactly. So you shake hands, you start working, but then imagine your university administration somehow finds out about this, right?
Oh.
Yeah. And they send a certified letter to that diner owner saying, actually, that is illegal.
Wait, what?
Yeah. They say, you are only allowed to pay our student $50 a week. And their reasoning is, well, we need to make sure the students at the rival college across town aren't getting jealous.
I mean, that sounds completely absurd.
Right.
The diner owner would just laugh at them.
Yeah.
You'd probably quit. And, well, if the school actually tried to enforce it, both of you would immediately sue the university.
Oh, instantly.
Yeah, for interfering with a private business transaction. Like, they have no right to do that.
And you would win because, I mean, a university has absolutely no legal right to dictate what a private citizen gets paid by a private business. It's a free market.
Exactly.
But, and this is the wild part, if you are a fan listening to this deep dive right now, you probably realize that this exact absurd scenario is at the very heart of a multi-billion-dollar crisis, one that is actively tearing college football apart.
Yeah, it really is. It is the defining structural crisis of modern sports right now.
Definitely.
We are essentially watching a massive system buckle in real time.
Yeah.
Because it is trying to apply these arbitrary rules to a completely free market.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are looking at a really, really compelling analysis today.
It's a fascinating piece.
It is. It's an excerpt titled Reality Check, Why It'll Never Happen. And this comes from a larger project called the Film Room Remix. And the mission of this specific piece, the reason we are doing this deep dive today, is to kind of get away from the daily hot takes.
Oh, the endless hot take.
Yeah, the panics, ESPN, chyrons, all of that. We want to slow down and look at the actual, literal, underlying mechanics of how the college sports system operates.
Which is so needed right now.
It really is. Specifically, we are putting the endlessly debated idea of an NCAA salary cap under the microscope.
And, you know, the reason this specific analysis is so crucial is that it fundamentally shifts the entire premise of the debate.
How so?
Well, if you turn on, like, any sports talk radio show today, the argument is always moral, right? Or competitive.
Oh, for sure. Like, we need a salary cap to save the sport.
Exactly. Or, you know, we need a cap so the wealthiest programs don't just buy all the best players. People are constantly arguing about whether a cap is a good idea.
Right. But this piece, the source we're looking at, it just stops us and says, hey, that's actually completely irrelevant.
Precisely. It argues that the biggest issue isn't whether a cap would help competitive balance on the field. The actual issue is whether a salary cap is fundamentally, legally, and structurally possible within the system as it is currently built.
And spoiler alert, what's the answer?
The answer is a resounding, definitive no. It's just not possible.
Okay, so as someone who follows this stuff pretty closely, I have to play the role of the frustrated fan here for a second.
Go for it.
Because my immediate reaction, and probably the reaction of everyone listening to this deep dive, is, well, why not?
Right. It seems so simple.
Yeah. I mean, the NFL has a salary cap. The NBA has a salary cap. We watch college football on the exact same networks, right? In stadiums that are just as big.
Sometimes bigger, honestly.
Exactly. Generating literally billions of dollars in television revenue. So why can't college football just, I don't know, copy the NFL's legal framework and implement a cap? It seems like such an obvious silver bullet solution.
Yeah. And that is the logical leap almost everyone makes. But it misses a massive foundational distinction in both labor and corporate law.
Okay, let's break that down.
To understand why we can't just copy the NFL, we really have to look at the actual architecture of these leagues. A professional league, like the NFL, is a highly organized, legally unified corporate entity.
Right.
It operates as a joint venture. So all 32 teams have legally bound themselves together under one shared financial umbrella.
Meaning they pool their, like all of it goes into one pot?
They pool the vast majority of their significant revenue. The national television contracts, the major merchandising deals, the licensing, that money all goes into a central pot.
Controlled by the league.
Right, controlled by the league office in New York.
Yeah.
The NFL, acting as a central authority, then distributes that money to the teams.
Gotcha.
And because it is their own shared revenue, generated by their own unified corporate structure, The owners can sit down in a room and mutually agree to a mechanism like a salary cap.
Because it's their money.
Exactly. A cap is just an internal rule they impose on themselves to regulate how they spend their own money.
Okay, but the NCAA doesn't function like that at all, does it?
Not even close.
Mm.
College football does not operate like a professional league because there is no unified business model.
Right.
The NCAA is not a corporation that owns the teams. It is a completely decentralized, loose association of, what, hundreds of independent academic institutions?
Oh, wow, yeah, hundreds of them.
And they exist as different states under completely different state laws with vastly different budgets.
Private schools, public school.
Exactly. There is no single central authority that brings in all the money, cuts the checks to the players, and dictates the financial terms of their participation in some unified way.
Okay, let's try to visualize this, because the contrast between a centralized corporation like the NFL and a decentralized association like the NCAA is really where this whole salary cap idea starts to just fall apart.
It totally crumbles.
It's kind of like, imagine a massive neighborhood block party.
Okay, let's play this analogy out. I like this.
So you've got 50 different houses participating in this block party, right? Everyone brings their own food. Some people set up games in their front yards. Neighbors are trading side dishes.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. And maybe someone pays the teenager down the street $20 to just watch the grill for a few hours. It's totally decentralized, it's a bit chaotic, but everyone is having a good time and it functions.
Right. It works for what it is.
Now, imagine a guy from a strict corporate HR department just walks into this block party.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he looks at all this chaos and he announces, all right, everyone, I am implementing a strict, standardized pay scale for this party. Nobody is allowed to trade more than 2 hot dogs per hour.
Okay.
And the teenager on the grill, he is legally capped at $10. No one can pay him more.
I mean, the neighborhood would either ignore him completely or literally run him off the street.
Exactly, because he has no authority. The rules he's suggesting, they might make perfect rational sense if this were a corporate cafeteria that we ran. But the block party has no CEO. It has no central budget. You can't just mandate professional corporate rules onto a foundation that is fundamentally just a loose gathering of independent actors.
That analogy hits the core of the structural mismatch perfectly. And, it brings us to the first major roadblock our source identifies.
Aegis.
The open market and the legal minefield of private money.
Ah, right.
Because to implement a salary cap, you need to actually control the money you are capping. But in college sports, let me ask you, who is actually paying the players right now?
Well, it's not the schools. Or, I mean, at least it's not legally the schools cutting a payroll check for playing football. It's name, image, and likeness money. It's NIL.
Right. Because college athletes are currently classified as student athletes and not employees, the universities cannot directly pay them a salary to play a sport.
So all the money we hear about?
Yeah, the millions of dollars we see flying around the sport right now, the massive recruitment deals, the crazy transfer portal payouts, that money is coming from outside, third-party sources.
Private sources.
Yeah. Exactly. Wealthy boosters, localized NIL collectives, local car dealerships, independent marketing deals.
So if I'm the NCAA or, say, a conference commissioner, and I say, hey, we are going to cap player compensation at $2 million per team, I am not actually capping my own money.
No, you're not.
I am trying to cap third-party private money.
Which brings us right back to your diner analogy at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Right.
The moment you try to regulate private transactions in a free market, you are stepping into an absolute legal bloodbath.
A legal bloodbath. I mean, that sounds dramatic, but it's true. Let's get into the weeds on this a little bit, because I think a lot of fans hear a term like antitrust and their eyes just glaze over.
Yeah, it sounds like boring lawyer stuff.
It does, but it's actually the entire key to why the system is totally paralyzed right now.
It really is. So the Sherman Antitrust Act fundamentally protects free trade and commerce against arbitrary restraints. In a free market economy, a private business, let's say an NIL collective, that's funded by a bunch of rich alumni, that collective has the legal right to pay an individual whatever they deem fair market value for their services.
So if a collective wants to pay some highly touted high school quarterback $1 million for the use of his name, image, and likeness.
That is a private contract between two independent parties.
Okay, so if the NCAA steps in and says, no, we have a salary cap now, that collective is only allowed to pay him $50,000. What actually happens legally? Like, what is the immediate fallout?
The collective and the player immediately file an antitrust lawsuit.
Instantly.
Instantly. They go to a federal judge and they say, this organization, the NCAA, which does not even employ this player, is illegally conspiring to artificially suppress his wages.
And restrict their right to conduct commerce.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And based on recent Supreme Court rulings, I mean, the NCAA would lose that case almost instantly.
They don't have a leg to stand on.
They really don't.
Yeah.
You cannot artificially cap the earning power of a private citizen in an open market just because you, a separate entity, want to maintain competitive balance in your sports league.
I want to push back on this, though, just a little bit, just to make sure we are covering all the angles for you listening.
Sure, lay it on me.
What if the NCAA says, fine, we can't tell the collective what to pay the player,
Okay.
but we can tell the player that if they accept more than $50,000 from a collective, they lose their eligibility to play in our league. Doesn't that kind of bypass the diner analogy? Like, they aren't regulating the diner anymore. They are just setting rules for who gets to be a student at the school.
So that is the exact loophole the NCAA tried to use for decades.
Really?
Yes. That's how they maintained amateurism for so long. But recently, the courts have completely dismantled it.
Why? What changed?
Judges have basically recognized that playing college football at the highest level is effectively the only viable pathway to the NFL.
Right. There's no minor leaguer.
Exactly. It is a monopoly on elite player development. So, if a monopoly tells a worker, you cannot participate in the only market available to you unless you agree to let us artificially restrict your outside third-party income.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that is still an illegal restraint of trade.
Ah, so it's a monopoly issue.
Exactly. You can't use your monopoly power over the sport to force players to accept artificial caps on their free market value.
That makes a lot of sense.
And our source material warns about this explicitly. They note that trying to enforce these kinds of caps leads to lawsuits, immediate injunctions, and just a level of legal pushback that would effectively stall the entire college football season.
And an injunction, just for clarity, means a judge steps in before the lawsuit is even finished, right?
Right. The judge steps in and says, NCAA, you are forbidden from enforcing this rule until we go to trial.
Which means the rule is dead on arrival.
Dead on arrival. So we are left with this really stark reality.
Yeah.
You cannot cap outside money. It is legally impossible to put a ceiling on what independent businesses and boosters want to pay private citizens.
Okay, so if I'm the university president, right, and I'm staring at this massive antitrust wall, I realize I have only one option left.
What's that?
If I can't legally cap other people's money, I have to make it my money.
Yes. Now you're thinking like an athletic director.
I have to bring the NIL collectives in-house. I have to take all that booster money, combine it with the massive television revenue I'm already getting, put it all into one big university bank account, and just pay the players directly myself.
Right.
Because if I am the one cutting the checks, then I can finally dictate the terms, I can establish a payroll, and finally, I can establish a cap.
That is the logical next step. It's the only way around the antitrust issue. But, and this is a massive but, as the analysis in our source points out, this introduces the ultimate classification tipping point.
The tipping point.
Right. The moment a university establishes an internal controlled financial structure to directly compensate athletes for their athletic performance, a massive legal threshold is crossed.
And the student-athlete facade, the whole thing just completely evaporates.
It shatters. The source asks the critical question here. If the players are operating within a controlled financial structure tied directly to the school, are they still just students? Or are they employees?
And the piece answers that with what I think is honestly the most terrifying sentence in the entire document for an athletic director.
Oh, I know the one.
Yeah. It says, because if they're employees, everything changes.
Everything. This is where we transition from a sports debate into a hardcore labor law reality.
Right.
If you want the legal authority to enact a salary cap on your own payroll, you must formally become the employer.
You can't have it both ways.
Exactly. And the moment you become the employer, you trigger a cascade of legal obligations that the current college sports system is utterly, totally unprepared to handle.
So what are these obligations?
The source lists 4 massive elements that instantly become reality. Contracts, labor rights, collective bargaining, and revenue sharing.
Wow. Okay, we need to look at the mechanics of each of these to understand why universities are so terrified of this path. Let's start with contracts. Right now, a kid signs a national letter of intent, they get a scholarship, and they show up to practice. It's basically an agreement to attend classes in exchange for tuition, right? How does an employment contract actually change that dynamic?
An employment contract fundamentally shifts the relationship. It goes from an educational mentorship to a strict transactional business arrangement.
Okay.
If a player is a W-2 employee of the university, that contract has to dictate specific duties.
Like what?
It outlines hours of work, mandatory appearances, termination clauses, and rigid compensation structures.
Huh.
But it goes so much deeper than just getting a paycheck.
What else?
Think about tax liabilities. The university is now responsible for massive payroll taxes. And think about liability and risk.
Oh, right. Workers' compensation.
Exactly. Football is an inherently violent, dangerous sport.
Very.
Right now, if a 20-year-old running back suffers a catastrophic career-ending spine injury, his medical care might be covered by the school's insurance while he is enrolled, sure. But the school is largely shielded from long-term occupational liability because legally, he is just a student playing a game.
Wow. But if he's an employee who gets injured on the job...
Everything changes. He is entitled to comprehensive workers' compensation, long-term disability claims, and potential lawsuits against the university for unsafe working conditions.
The financial risk profile of the university basically skyrockets overnight.
It goes through the roof, which bleeds right into the second element, labor rights.
Okay, labor rights. So if they are employees, they fall under the jurisdiction of the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB.
Right. And as employees under the NLRB, players would be entitled to standard federal and state labor protections.
Meaning?
We are talking about strict regulations on workplace safety, the right to legally dispute working conditions, formal grievance procedures against management, and management in this case means the coaching staff.
Oh man, imagine filing a formal grievance against Nick Saban or Kirby Smart.
Exactly. And most importantly, the most terrifying thing for the schools, the right to strike.
Okay, let's pause on that. The right to strike. Because if you're a fan listening, really think about the mechanics of that.
It's wild to picture.
It is. Imagine it's the week before the brand new 12-team college football playoff.
The biggest week of the year.
Right. The university is set to make tens of millions of dollars from the broadcast. The football team, as recognized legal employees, could legally refuse to take the field unless the university meets certain demands.
Like regarding their health benefits or guaranteed contracts for the following season.
It gives the labor force immense leverage.
Immense leverage. And because they would have that leverage, they would inevitably organize to maximize it. Which brings us to the third massive element, collective bargaining.
And this is where the NFL comparison finally comes back around, isn't it? But not in the way the universities actually want it to.
Exactly. In professional sports, a salary cap isn't just decreed by the owners from on high. They don't just snap their fingers.
Right.
It is legally permissible only because it is negotiated with a recognized labor union through a collective bargaining agreement, or CBA.
Okay, so the union has to agree to the cap.
Right. The only reason the NFL's salary cap doesn't violate those antitrust laws we talked about earlier is because of a specific legal exemption. And that exemption is only granted when management and a recognized labor union agree to the terms in a CBA.
So to get their precious salary cap, the universities have to willingly allow their players to unionize.
They have no choice. They would have to sit across a negotiating table from a union representing thousands of athletes, or at least the athletes in their specific conference,
Right.
and hash out a legally binding labor contract.
Yeah.
The unilateral power that the NCAA and university presidents have enjoyed for over a century would just instantly vanish.
They would have to negotiate everything.
Everything. Practice hours, off-season commitments, media availability, and, of course, the actual money.
Which leads us to the fourth and final horseman of this employee apocalypse, revenue sharing.
Oh, yeah. Revenue sharing is the big one. When a union sits down to negotiate a CBA with a multi-billion-dollar entertainment property, they aren't going to settle for tuition and a small stipend anymore.
No way.
They are going to look at the massive television contracts. Like, think about the Big Ten's multi-billion-dollar deal with Fox and CBS.
Billions of dollars.
And they will demand a fixed percentage of that gross revenue.
Because they are the labor generating the product.
Exactly. In the NFL and the NBA, the players' union generally negotiates a revenue split that hovers right around 50-50.
So half of all the money goes to the players.
Right. Now imagine a college athletic department, which, let's be honest, already struggles to balance its books, suddenly having to surrender 50% of its primary revenue stream directly to the football players' union.
It's an impossible paradox. To summarize this incredible loop we've just unpacked for you listening, The schools are desperate for a salary cap to control their costs, right? To keep the sport from devolving into an unregulated bidding war. But they can't cap outside money without getting sued for antitrust.
Nope.
So to get the cap, they have to bring the money inside and become the legal employer. But by becoming the employer, they legally force themselves to recognize unions, grant labor rights, assume massive workers' compliabilities, and share half their revenue with the players.
It is the ultimate catch-22. The source material actually puts it perfectly. They say, that's not a small adjustment. That's a complete redefinition of what college athletics actually is.
It really is. It's the absolute death of amateurism. I mean, for 100 years, the NCAA has defended itself in court before Congress and to the public by hiding behind this moral shield of the student athlete.
The great shield.
Yeah. They have argued that the educational value of a scholarship is the primary compensation, and the sports are merely an extracurricular extension of the academic experience.
But the moment they do this,
Right. The moment a university establishes a capped payroll and signs a collective bargaining agreement, they are standing up in front of the world and admitting, yes, this is a professional sports franchise operating under the logo of a university.
the legal fiction would be officially dead.
Gone. Now, if I'm playing devil's advocate again, I can hear a certain segment of the fan base saying, so what?
Right. Who cares?
Yeah. It's already a professional sport in everything but name. The facade is already dead. Let them unionize. Let them collectively bargain. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off, share the TV money with the football players, and finally get some regulated NFL-style order to this sport.
And honestly, if college football existed in a vacuum, if it was just an independent minor league system entirely divorced from higher education, that is exactly what would happen.
They would have done it already.
They would have ripped the Band-Aid off years ago.
But it doesn't exist in a vacuum.
It doesn't. And this is where the source analysis takes us into the next critical, unavoidable layer of this impossibility.
Okay, what's that?
College football is tethered to a university. It is just one department within a massive interconnected educational ecosystem.
Right.
And if you rip the Band-Aid off and make the football players salaried employees, you instantly trigger the reality of federal civil rights law, specifically Title IX.
Okay, this is the Whipple effect, and I want us to spend a lot of time on this because I think Title IX is the single biggest structural barrier that fans misunderstand or completely ignore when they talk about paying college athletes.
Oh, absolutely. It is the absolute third rail of this entire conversation.
Right.
The source points out that Title IX requires gender equity across collegiate athletics. You cannot legally implement a massive, lucrative financial structure like a multi-million-dollar employee payroll and revenue sharing exclusively for the male-dominated football team without considering how it impacts the other sports on campus.
It makes me think of like a sweater analogy.
A sweater, okay.
Yeah, you look at the sleeve of a sweater and you see a loose thread. Let's call that the unregulated NIL market in football.
Okay, I'm with you.
And you think, I'll just pull this thread and fix the sleeve. But the thread is woven into the entire garment. You pull the football thread, and suddenly the entire athletic department unravels.
That's a great way to put it. Let's walk through the actual legal mechanics and the math of Title IX to show exactly how it unravels.
Let's do it.
Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 mandates that any institution receiving federal funding must provide equal athletic opportunities, benefits, and treatment for members of both sexes.
Okay.
Historically, this has meant that if a university provides 85 full scholarships for a men's football team, they have to find a way to provide a proportional number of scholarships for female athletes across various sports.
Like rowing or volleyball or gymnastics?
Exactly. And it applies to facilities, travel accommodations, medical care, and equipment.
Right. If the football team gets a multi-million-dollar chartered flight to a game, you have to provide equitable travel standards for the women's basketball team.
Exactly. Now, let's apply the employee classification to this standard of equity. Let's say a major university decides to just bite the bullet. They bring the football money in-house, they classify the 85 scholarship football players as legal employees, and they agree to a collective bargaining agreement that establishes a, say, $15 million salary cap for the team.
Okay, so the football players are now directly receiving millions of dollars in W-2 wages from the university.
The immediate question from the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights is going to be, Where is the equitable compensation structure for your female employees?
Oh.
Exactly.
Oh.
You cannot have 85 male athletes legally classified as highly paid, unionized employees of the university, while simultaneously telling the women's volleyball, basketball, and softball teams that they are still just amateur student athletes who only get a scholarship.
Right, because you're treating the men as employees and the women as amateurs.
Right. If athletic participation is now legally classified as employment by the university, Title IX heavily suggests, and civil rights lawyers would immediately sue to ensure that you must extend equitable employee status, wages, and benefits to the female athletes.
And this is where the math of college sports absolutely disintegrates.
It implodes.
Let's look at the actual ledger of a typical college athletic department for a second. Because I think a lot of people see the massive TV deals and they just assume these universities are swimming in profit.
A very common misconception.
Right. But the reality is, with the exception of maybe 20 or 30 massive programs, your Ohio States, Texas, Alabama, the vast majority of division athletic departments actually operate at a loss.
Or they rely heavily on student fees and university subsidies just to break even.
Right. Football and occasionally men's basketball are the only sports that generate substantial revenue. They are the financial engines of the whole school.
They fund everything.
Every dollar of profit generated by a packed football stadium is almost immediately siphoned off to fund the travel, the coaching salaries, the equipment, and the scholarships for the other 20-plus sports on campus.
Both men's and women's.
Right. Sports that lose money.
They are entirely subsidized by football.
So, if you suddenly declare that the football engine must now share 50% of its revenue directly with its own players through a collectively bargained salary, you have just drained the very fund that keeps the rest of the athletic department alive.
But it's actually worse than that.
How?
You haven't just drained the fund, you've simultaneously multiplied your legal financial obligations.
Because of Title IX.
Because of Title IX.
Right.
You don't just have to find the $15 million to pay the football players. You have to find an equitable amount of millions to pay the female athletes across all those non-revenue sports.
So where does that money come from?
It doesn't exist. There's literally no magical vault of hidden money. If a sport like women's field hockey or men's swimming does not generate broadcast or ticket revenue, how does the university justify paying them a competitive employee salary?
They can't.
They simply can't, which means the university is faced with an impossible choice. Let's call them options A, B, and C.
Okay, lay them out.
Option A. They wildly violate Title IX by only paying the football players.
Which invites massive federal lawsuits.
Right. And the potential loss of all federal university funding, which includes research grants and federal student loans.
Yeah.
That would literally bankrupt the academic side of the university.
So option A is a complete non-starter.
Option A is a non-starter. Option B, they try to comply with Title IX by paying equitable salaries to hundreds of athletes across all sports.
Which instantly bankrupts the athletic department because the math literally does not work. The money isn't there.
Exactly. And that leads to the devastating option C, which is the unstated fear behind all of this.
What's option C?
If a university is forced into an employee-employer model to get a salary cap, and they have to balance the Title IX budget, the only mathematical way to survive is to drastically reduce the number of sports offered.
Oh, wow. They'd have to cut teams.
You would see athletic departments entirely gut their Olympic sports programs. They would cut men's track, men's swimming, wrestling, and enough women's sports to balance the newly reduced Title IX ratio. Leaving a barren athletic department consisting of just football, basketball, and a handful of heavily subsidized women's sports just to meet the bare minimum federal requirements.
The pursuit of a football salary cap would literally destroy the collegiate Olympic developmental system in this country.
This is exactly why the source piece emphasizes that any attempt to control money in one area creates ripple effects across the entire system.
The loose thread on the sweater.
You cannot artificially isolate college football from the university.
Right.
It is legally tethered to the institution, and the institution is legally tethered to federal equity laws.
You cannot just build a ruthlessly efficient professional sports franchise inside a nonprofit educational institution without the legal realities of that institution bearing down on you and crushing the financials.
It just doesn't work.
So let's take a deep breath here and look at the absolute gridlock we have uncovered by just following the logic of this source material.
It's a lot to process.
It is. We started with what seemed like a totally rational, simple premise. Let's just apply a salary cap to balance the competition in college football.
And step by step, We found that to be structurally impossible. First, we realized you can't cap the current money because it's private, open market NIL money.
Right.
If you try to cap third-party businesses, you violate antitrust laws and get sued into oblivion.
Right. So, to avoid the antitrust lawsuit, you try to bring the money in-house to control it yourself,
But doing that formally classifies the players as employees.
which triggers the NLRB, forces you to negotiate with the labor union, accept strikes, provide workers' compensation, and share your gross revenue.
And even if a university is wealthy enough to accept all of those labor realities, classifying the football players as employees triggers Title IX's.
Forcing the university to find tens of millions of dollars in non-existent revenue to equitably employ the rest of the athletic department.
Or forcing them to gut collegiate sports entirely.
It is a perfect, inescapable circle of structural impossibility. Every single solution triggers a fatal legal consequence in a different area of the system.
It really is.
Which brings us to the inevitable redefinition, the ultimate conclusion of our deep dive today.
Okay.
What happens when the free market leads to competitive chaos, but capping the market leads to employee status, and employee status breaks the university budget?
You hit a wall, a massive, unbreakable structural wall. And the piece we are analyzing states this beautifully. They write, while the idea of a salary cap makes sense when you look at competition, it doesn't align with how the system is built.
It is the ultimate tension between an amateur foundation and a professional reality. The system is trying to be two completely contradictory things at the exact same time.
It is, and the source uses a very specific phrasing that is worth highlighting here. It's like trying to apply professional rules to something that still operates under a completely different foundation.
We've used a few analogies today, the diner, the block party, the sweater, but it really comes down to architecture, doesn't it?
Architecture. Okay, let's hear it.
Think about a 19th century wooden cottage.
Okay, a quaint little cottage.
Right. It was built for a very specific, quaint purpose. Now imagine trying to build a 100-story, state-of-the-art glass and steel skyscraper directly on top of that wooden cottage foundation.
I mean, the foundation would be pulverized. Instantly.
Exactly. The foundation of college sports was built over a century ago for students playing extracurricular games between classes.
Right. It was built on the legal premise of amateurism and educational benefit.
It was not built to support a multi-billion-dollar, internationally broadcast entertainment industry governed by complex labor unions, federal equity laws, and antitrust litigation. You cannot put a skyscraper on a cottage.
You really can't. And this raises the most profound philosophical point of this entire analysis. If the foundation cannot support the structure that has already been built on top of it, what happens next?
Right. Does the system just keep bending and groaning, or is it fundamentally, irreversibly broken?
The conclusion of the source piece is actually quite clear on this. They say, and until that foundation changes, the idea of a cap is going to stay exactly where it is right now. A good idea that doesn't quite have a place to exist.
Wow.
Yeah. This heavily implies that a foundational change isn't just an option being discussed in boardrooms. It is an eventual, mathematical, and legal necessity.
We have to tear down the cottage.
We have to.
To actually apply the simple, rational rule of a salary cap, you literally have to burn down the century-old foundation of college sports.
You have to separate the massive revenue-generating sports from the educational mission of the university.
You have to build a brand new professional enterprise from scratch where these athletes are legally acknowledged as professional athletes.
Operating in a fully professional league, separate from the Title IX constraints of the academic side.
The system is structurally incompatible with the reality of its own financial success. It grew too big, it generated too much broadcast money, and it completely outgrew its amateur roots.
It is a fascinating real-time case study in how systems evolve and how clinging to outdated legal definitions like the student-athlete can eventually paralyze an entire multi-billion-dollar industry.
It really is incredible when you step back and look at the whole board. Let's just recap the journey we've been on today.
Do it.
We started with the frustrated fans' simple demand. Just implement a salary cap.
And then we explored why the NCAA isn't a unified corporate entity like the NFL, making a centralized cap structurally difficult from day one.
Right. We dove deep into the weeds of the Sherman Antitrust Act, showing exactly why attempting to cap private, open-market NIL money from local diners and boosters guarantees an unwinnable federal lawsuit.
Then we examined the classification trap, realizing that controlling the money inevitably turns students into legal employees, bringing contracts, the NLRB, unions, and 50-50 revenue sharing to the table.
And finally, we walked through the brutal math of Title IX, proving how treating the football team as salaried employees financially destabilizes the entire interconnected university ecosystem.
The ultimate takeaway from our deep dive today is extremely clear. You cannot fix a foundation-level structural problem with a surface-level rule.
The foundation itself must be remade.
It has to be.
And as we consider the reality of that massive foundational shift, we want to leave you, listening right now, with a final thought to ponder on your own.
Yeah, big question.
If this foundation finally does break, if the universities finally admit defeat, spin off the football programs, officially restructure, abandon the student-athlete facade entirely, and become fully salaried collective bargaining professional leagues,
What happens to you?
what happens to the fans?
Exactly. The
Well,
entire appeal of college sports, the reason a Tuesday night May conference game draws 1 million viewers, is based on a deep, irrational, tribal, emotional bond.
it's the marching bands, the student sections, the feeling that the kids on the field are representing your alma mater.
Does that emotional connection survive when the players wearing the jerseys are legally acknowledged as hired, unionized employees of a separate corporate entity rather than fellow students representing the school? If college football just becomes a minor league NFL with university branding, do you still care as much?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question that the university presidents are terrified to answer. The very restructuring required to legally save the sport might be the exact thing that destroys the magic that makes it popular in the first place.
It is a massive thing to chew on.
We really hope this deep dive gave you a completely new perspective the next time you hear someone screaming on TV about fixing college football. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep asking questions, keep looking beneath the surface of the messy systems around you, and we'll see you next time.